Welcome, everyone, to PARC Forum. I know some of you braved the rain to be here today, so we thank you for attending. Today's forum is the third talk in our special speaker series on going beyond Web 2.0, the power of the web for collaboratively co-creating knowledge, enabling enterprises to use social software systems more effectively, and so on. Before I introduce today's speaker, I wanted to let you all know that the first two talks in this series, Ross Mayfield of Social Text, who spoke about how Web 2.0 is made of people, and Garrett Camp of Stumble Upon, that both of their forum talks are available in our online archive, which is at www.parc.com/forums. Forum talks are usually posted there after a few days, and Charlene's talk today will be posted there as well. Next Thursday's forum, so just to tell you about some of the upcoming forums, will be presented by Guy Kawasaki of Trumers and Garage Technology Ventures. And the title of that talk is By the Numbers, How I Built a Web 2.0 User-Generated Content, Citizen Journalism, Long-Tail Social Media Site for $12,107.09. After that talk, we'll take a break for a few Thursdays during the winter holidays, and we'll resume PARC Forum on January 10th with Bernardo Huberman of HP Labs, who will talk about social dynamics in the age of the web. So, one of the things we've tried to do with this series is to represent different perspectives with different business models, different approaches, different audiences, and technologies related to Web 2.0 and beyond. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Charlene Li of Forrester, who provides an industry analyst perspective. Charlene is one of the driving forces behind Forrester's social computing and Web 2.0 research, and she examines how companies can use technologies like blogs, social networking, RSS, tagging, and widgets for marketing purposes. In her research, Charlene covers marketing-related topics such as consumer portals, search, and media site design, and also leverages her background in newspaper publishing to look at online local media and classifieds. In the past, Charlene's written about online advertising, online gaming, and media content technologies. Charlene holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. She's one of Forrester's most quoted analysts and has appeared in outlets like the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, CNN, NPR, BBC, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, and Business Week. During her 8 years at Forrester, Charlene has also led the marketing and media research team and ran the San Francisco office. She also contributes to her Groundswell blog and plans to publish a book by the same name on May 1st, 2008. So without further delay, here's Charlene. Thanks.
And thank you for joining me today. I have a couple things I'm going to talk about today, and the title is Strategies for Winning in a World Transformed by Social Technologies. And the reason I chose this title is obviously because it's related to the book that we just actually handed into our editors, but it's also because this whole idea of transformation. And when we talk about Web 2.0 and beyond Web 2.0, which is part of what the series is all about, it's really not about what's happening today, but also what's going to happen tomorrow, a few years down the line, and also what's happening into society. And I often believe that what's happening with these social technologies is transforming not just the technologies, but also the relationships that are being formed. So I want to just put up here a couple of the technologies that are very much associated with Web 2.0. Lots of buzzwords out there, way too many acronyms that people don't understand. And also one of my favorite things, down here in the lower right corner, Twitter, which recently came out this past year, sort of bursting onto the scene. And as an analyst, I'm often asked, what do all these technologies mean? Or how do I use them in my business context? Or how should I use them as an individual? And really importantly, which of these technologies matter? And in the end, I say none of these technologies matter. And that's hard to say sometimes as a technology analyst. Instead, what I say, and what my theme is, really much more around the people who use these technologies. Because in the end, whether people adopt these things, how they use it, and more importantly, how these technologies change the relationships between people is the most interesting thing happening in this space today. Because it's not just the fact that someone takes up RSS, but how does that change the relationship with how they use media? Or if they use Twitter, how does that change the way they communicate? Does it replace some of the things they do? Does it actually change the relationships that people have? Just a quick show of hands, how many people here actually use Twitter? have used it. So quite a few number of people here. And I think if you think about the ways that you actually communicate and the way you relate to some of those people today, it's actually going to be very different. So what I'm going to talk about today is this trend called groundswell. And what we define groundswell is a social trend in which people use technologies to get the things they need from each other, rather than from traditional institutions like corporations. And the reason I say this is a particular idea, it's not about Web 2.0 and the technologies. It's about the fact that people are depending on each other now for the things they used to get. It could be news. It could be materials and merchandise, for example, buying things on eBay. So these are all technologies that are enabling these new relationships to form that you couldn't have before, that people could not connect in the way that they can today. So what I'm going to be talking about today is this key theme, which is that you have to focus on the relationships instead of the technologies to be successful in this space. Again, it's the relationships that matter and the way they change rather than the technologies. Because I guarantee you, if I were to come back here a year from now, those technologies that you saw on the first slide would be a totally different set of technologies. There are always going to be new ones that come along. But the thing that stays constant is the relationships that you have with the people that you know and the people that you can potentially meet. So I'm going to talk about today a couple of things. First of all, what's the process you should follow in order to create a coherent social strategy? And I would do a lot of work with companies in particular, and organizations too, about how do you approach this? And oftentimes I get questions from people like, how do I do blogs? How do I create social networking strategies? And we'll talk about the right coherent process to do that. The second thing we'll talk about is what are the objectives and the results that you can expect from using these Web 2.0 technologies. And then the third part, a quick section on who should lead and own these types of strategies. And then finally, I'll take you through a case study of how social technologies has transformed a business. And when I'm talking about transforming a business, I'm not just talking about a company using these technologies, but it's actually starting to change the way that companies are organized, the way that they staff and hire, and the way that they, again, talk and work with their customers. So the first question is, what process should companies follow to create a coherent social strategies? So here's a typical scenario. Someone calls me up and says, you know, we need to have a blog. CEO says we need to have a blog, like now. So how do we go do that? And I'm like, okay, that's like a great idea. It's a great way to communicate. Well, what do you want to do with the blog? And I typically have this long silence that follows that. And it's because the problem is they just think about the technologies. They're not thinking about why they want to have a blog or have a podcast or create a social network of their customers. So what we encourage people to have and to follow is what we call the POST method. P-O-S-T. Partly this is a method that describes the 4 steps, and also it's a nice, easy acronym to remember. So P is for people. You have to, first of all, start out and understand who is using your technologies. What are your customers actually doing? O is for objective. We believe that there are 5 objectives, and I'll take you through them in the second section. And you have to know why you're doing this. And you base it on the fact your customers, the people part, actually are using certain technologies or not. So a lot of them are actively engaged in these social technologies. That's going to dictate in many ways what your objectives and strategies are going to be. Once you know what your objectives are, then you can go and create a strategy around that. And strategy is oftentimes what you will do, but also what you won't do. And strategies are also short-term, but also long-term. So thinking about how you want to change that relationship today and then tomorrow. And then finally, at the end, once you know these other things, then you can pick the technologies. Only then do you start looking at the specific technologies that can help you meet those strategies. So I'm going to take you quickly through how we think about people. At Forrester, we do a lot of surveys. And this is meant to be very, very hard to read in some ways, because I don't want to go through all the nitty-gritty detail. But we go and survey so many customers in terms of how many people use social technologies like social networking. At the very top, about a quarter of all adults who are online are using social networking sites at least once a month. And you can go down through the whole list of technologies and get a whole bunch of data. But in the end, it's not going to tell you very much about the way people are truly engaged and participating in social technologies. Instead, we like to think about it in a different way. We call it social technographics, and the foundation of that is what we call a ladder of participation. I'm going to draw that up here for you. And at the very bottom of that ladder are a group of people called inactives. They're the people who do not use social technologies today. It could be because they just haven't gotten around to it. They don't think that there's anything out there that's interesting to them. Their friends aren't using it, so this is not active today. A level above that are people we call spectators. They're reading blogs, they're listening to podcasts, they're watching videos on YouTube. So they're engaging in these activities, but they're not actively putting a piece of themselves out there. They're on the sidelines, they're being spectators in the sport of social technologies. One level above that are the joiners, people who are active in social networking sites. And a level above that are the collectors, a pretty interesting, unique group right now. They're the people who organize the content out there through delicious tags, collect things on RSS. They may be making lists on Amazon or on places like StumbleUpon that you saw last week. Above that are the critics, people who are commenting on blogs, engaging in discussion groups and actively participating in them, or maybe editing pages on Wikipedia. They tend to be taking content that's already there and adding to it. And then finally, at the very top are the creators, the people who actively are engaging in creating content like writing blogs, creating podcasts, uploading video onto YouTube that they have created. And again, we have data around each of this. So we have collected it for both adults and for youth. And I know there are a lot of good scientific minds in here, the numbers do not add up to 100%. And the reasons why is because you can be in multiple parts of these categories. So it's not a strict segmentation. Obviously, if you're inactive, you're not going to be in other parts of the ladder. But for example, in my world, I can be a spectator here at 48% of the population are spectators, but only about 18% of people are creators. But I'm in both of those categories. Yeah, did you have a quick question?
Have you seen a clear evolution on the percentage of people that are creators?
In terms of the number of people, it's definitely increasing. I'll just give you an idea. The number and percentage, we started doing this about a year ago, just starting to track it. And already, just the people who are inactive, it used to be about 54% a year ago, now it's down to 44%. And the numbers are increasing, so you see people climbing up that ladder over time. We suspect at some point that number of inactives is going to be very, very low. And I'll show you a generational slide on the next one to give you an idea of just how drastic it can be. But one thing also to note is that these numbers are not static. People go up and down the ladder depending on different parts of their lives. So in the social media space, I'm actively engaged in all parts of this ladder. But I'm also very passionate about environmental issues. And so like solar power, driving a hybrid car. But I am strictly a spectator when it comes to environmental issues. I don't blog about it. I don't necessarily share a lot of information. I'm not in a social network actively talking about those things. So depending on where people are, they may be engaged in social technologies, but not necessarily in a topic area that you're active in. But it's very interesting, the fact that I have been a creator at some point in my life, and that I'm currently creating, means that the potential for me to be able to be a creator in that particular area, like environmental issues, it's much greater and easier for me to move up that ladder, because I've climbed that ladder. So for those of you who ever blogged, you may remember the very first time that you published. I know for the first time when I published, it was an absolutely terrifying experience to go and push that publish button and know that everyone in the world could see what my thoughts were. And that they could come back and tell me exactly whether they thought I had a good idea or that my idea was really not that well formed. And so in many ways, that level of participation is a mindset that people develop over time. So I want to show you some of the numbers here in terms of how it changes by generation. Now you can see for young people, in particular Generation Y and the youth, that they're very, very engaged in these technologies. If you just look at the inactives, only 17% of youth 18 to 21 are inactive. And you go across, you can see again the level of actives increased tremendously. But look at one thing in particular, because this is not an area dedicated only to the youth. If you look at the older boomers, the 51 to 61-year-olds, people we oftentimes write off because, well, they can't be active in this space at all, right? But actually 39% of them are active as spectators. That means they're reading blogs, they're listening to podcasts, they're watching the videos on YouTube. And I think many of the reasons why they're not more active in the participation area is, again, I think it's early on still, the technologies are still hard, but more importantly, their social peer groups aren't necessarily there. I know for myself, I've been active in social networking sites from the very beginning, partly because it's my job, but it was only this past year when my social circle of friends finally came onto places like MySpace and Facebook. And it really became much more personal of an experience for me when that social group came on. There was a question here? Yeah.
Can you give me an example of a group that would be a spectator, but not any of the other four?
Yeah, a group that could be a spectator, not any of the other four. I'll give you an example again. It could be my brother, for example, who is really, what,
The other way around.
who could be the,
Somebody was in
it's
the
very unusual. It's very unusual. When we actually run the Venn diagrams on this, it's very unusual to be in any of the other four and not have done the spectator at least. But it's quite usual to see people who are creators, not joiners, critics who are not necessarily collectors.
That is exactly how I would feel intuitively. But then when I look at your numbers, I would think spectators and inactive should add up to 100%.
They're not necessarily. They're not. And it's a lot of different reasons. Partly, again, the fact that people, again, are different areas going up and down that ladder. Let me go and take a look at some of those numbers. If you follow up with me, I can give you some numbers afterwards. Okay. So a couple other things. I want to talk a little bit about the second part, beyond people, the objectives. And we believe that there, again, are 5 objectives. And oftentimes, they link back to very specific roles within a company. So if you think about research, market research, for example, you go out there, do a lot of surveys and focus groups. And what Web 2.0 technologies and these social technologies allow you to do is actually what we call listening in a very different way than you've done in the past to listen to customers. Another area is, for example, marketing. In many ways, marketing is about sending messages out. Traditionally has been a very one-way conversation. And then we actually think of it as talking instead. A third objective might be coming up from sales, where the objective is to increase revenue size of things, to get more products sold. And the way to do that is actually to energize your customers so that they do a lot of the selling and the promotion through viral marketing, word of mouth marketing. And then there's support, customer support. And the idea, again, is using the groundswell to have people support each other. And the last area is in terms of the research and development in particular. In product development and process development, to think about it, how can you extend the walls of your research organization, of the company, to embrace your customers so that they can now, again, drive some of the innovation process amongst each other. So I'm going to go through and take you through each of these objectives and give you some examples. So listening. Oftentimes, there's a conversation going on back and forth between people about what they're doing. And they would like to be able to come back to the company and say, this is what we're talking about. And so here's an example. This is a site that was created as a private community. And you can't join this community because you have to be invited into it. First of all, you have to have a dog. And it's called the I Love My Dog community. It was set up by Dell Monitoring to do some research on some new product development for them for their sausages line. And what they did is they found a couple hundred people, 400 or 500 people, to come and be a part of this community. And I just want to introduce you to one of the members. This is Pooch, and he belongs to an owner by the name of George. And what Dell Monitoring does, versus a focus group or a survey or a panel, this is an ongoing community that's been a membership for about 6 months. So they go in there and talk to each other, they have blogs, and Dell Monitoring can go in there and ask them many, many different questions very quickly in a short amount of time. So here's a typical kind of conversation. Dell Monitoring will go in and ask, what does your dog eat for breakfast? And then people will write back. In this case, George writes back, she would definitely want bacon and eggs. She would want ketchup on her eggs. She loves ketchup. Okay, so they go and take this, and they follow up very quickly. Again, it's much more of a conversation. Dell Monitoring comes back and says, would you buy more treats if they had vitamins and minerals as ingredients? And George comes back and says, I would buy healthier treats over ones that didn't have vitamins and minerals. I try to look for amino acids, omega-3, and fish oils. This is a person, again, what they found through their research is that these people don't think of their dogs as pets. They think of them as people. They're like full-fledged members of the family. And they're looking in great detail at the ingredients that go into these things. They also found that these owners really wanted their pets to actually eat food that looked like human food. So they gave them bacon and eggs and potatoes, things that actually looked like they were foods that they themselves would eat. So that's humanization of their pets. So they took this back and they were able to create products very, very quickly. And so this listening was interesting because it was much more of a conversation that was going on and taking place rather than one-off focus groups. And the fact of the matter is that they were able to build these products out at much lower cost and at much faster iterations. And also, they had a much better confidence that the marketplace would actually accept them. So I want to go on and talk about the next objective, which is talking. And it's much more about having a two-way conversation with people. So again, people are talking back and forth. And oftentimes what companies are doing is they're talking back to that audience. And what's different now, in terms of the marketing aspects of this, is that the customers are to some degree talking back. If you think about what marketing has always been, it's always been about having this perfect idea of a consumer that's sitting in the middle of the marketing department. And oftentimes when you go out there and you say, okay, this is what my product is about, here's my marketing message, you're hoping that that perfect consumer is out there and ready to listen to that message. And the reality is there's no such thing as a perfect consumer. And oftentimes what comes back is, we don't believe what you're saying. In fact, this is what we're hearing instead. And that marketing message gets twisted around and sometimes morphed into something you may not like as a company. What I think instead is happening is, instead of what marketing departments have done historically, is shout at their customers. And they do with the reach and frequency and measure things by GRP points, how many people saw that commercial doing a segment of a show. Instead, I think the conversation needs to take place. So I'll give you an example of how that's actually happening. So this is a blog written by Southwest Airlines. And if you've ever gone on Southwest Airlines, you know that this company is a little bit different. They do crazy things on airplanes. They all dress up on Halloween. And what they do with their blog is they have lots of different people go in and talk about things. I was just looking at the site this morning. They have a blog post from somebody who is a structural engineer. Now, structural engineers don't usually talk to passengers on Southwest Airlines. But this person was talking about how he brings this idea of serving customers into his work of being a structural engineer. And what does he do, and why is his passion about doing this, and what is it like about his job so much? And what Southwest is doing here is they're talking individual by individual with the employees from that ground level to talk about what it's like to be at Southwest and what it means to be a passenger and a customer on a Southwest jet. This is clearly marketing the organization and the company, but doing it through the ideals and words of the regular line employees. What I love about Southwest Airlines also is the CEO also goes on there. He talks about the company, but he also goes and asks people, what do you think I should dress up as on Halloween? And then he'll post pictures of himself dressed up as Jack from the Pirates of the Caribbean, because that's what people suggested the most that he be. So this is a different way of talking, and people talk back to Southwest. And what's amazing is when they talk back, Southwest has a policy that anybody who writes to them, calls them, emails them, gets a personal response. So they once got a blog post that had 800 comments on it. Guess what happened? The customer service department wrote 800 personalized emails back to everybody who sent in those comments. And that's a commitment from a company that they will communicate and have this two-way conversation. And that goes from the top to the bottom of the organization. And the blog has really transformed this company in a way that they could really capitalize and really point out that they believe in that level of communication all the way up and down. Here's another example of a company that's talking in a very different way. There's some people nodding. They've seen these videos. And this is a small blender company, and they sell $300 blenders. You may have seen them in Jamba Juices. And so it's called Blendtec. And the VP of marketing was walking through their lab and saw sawdust sitting on the floor. He said, why is there sawdust in a food lab? And he found out that the CEO likes to go into the lab and just churn up 2x4s just to see if the blenders actually worked or not. And he thought, hey, you know, if only people could see this. And then he thought, but they can. And so he went out there, bought $50 worth of equipment, things like magnets and Coke and chicken, and started blending them up in a blender. Created a site called willitblend.com, posted them on YouTube, and then asked people, hey, give us ideas of other things you'd like to see blended. And so somebody suggested, why did you blend up an iPod? And so they said, okay, let's blend it up. And so how many people have looked at this? Recently, 4.6 million people have looked at it. Okay. And if you look at this, people are responding back. They don't just say, oh, I really like this video. They record videos of them saying they like this video. Or actually, the most interesting thing is they're recording videos of them in their homes now with the blenders that they bought because they saw this video, saying, I love this blender. It's making great smoothies. And then they also say, you know, you can go and embed these videos. So there's a little embed code here on YouTube and on many other video sharing sites. So guess what people do? They like this video, they put it on their own blogs, they put it on their social networking sites, and it becomes even more viral. Now, this is a new way of talking. And how much did it cost the company to do this? $50. It's not money that buys you access in this space anymore. It's about creativity and ways of entertaining people in a very different way. And what was interesting is, who was the marketing genius behind this, the VP of marketing? What was his experience behind this? His previous job before working for this blender company was he was doing PR and marketing for a steel mill. Okay, so this is not the domain of the biggest agencies. This is the domain of people who really truly understand what that groundswell needs and wants and how to leverage that. I want to go on and talk about energizing. Very related to what we just talked about, but it's about helping your best customers recruit other customers. And so what happens is you may go and find that best customer, they get really excited and they go and zap their neighbors right next to them and say, you really got to go buy these things. And you all have done things that you're very excited about. You may have evangelized with TiVos. I'm really into those shoes that some people call ugly, which I think are lovely, called Crocs. And they're really comfortable. And so everyone has their passions of what they're excited about, and they share them. So I just want to show you one example here. When people get married, when brides in particular, they're really excited about it. And so what Brides.com does, they went onto MySpace. They created a special place for brides, because it's a very good demographic for them to reach them. Because there's content on the site for them to interact. And one of the things they do, a little bit further down, is they have these things that you can download and put onto your profile on MySpace. In this case, I highlighted a countdown ticker. You can say, okay, how many days and hours left before I get married? Okay, and so for those of you who got married, you know you're like counting every single day. And your friends can go and see this and get excited, you know, 7 days left until you get married. Whoo, congratulations, you're making it there. But they can also say, hey, I just got engaged. I'm going to go get that countdown ticker too. That's truly about energizing things. How do people find out about Brides.com? They may know about it, they can go search for it and find it, but oftentimes they see it on their friends' sites who are already engaged and getting married too. So it's interesting to see this, that all these ideas of badges, or widgets, whatever it is, it's the fact that I am associating myself with a brand. It could be my Prius, it could be my Crocs, it could be my TiVo, whatever it is, but I want to be proud about it and let people know that I'm a fan of this, and that I endorse it. And once people see it on my profile, on my blog, other people will see it. What MySpace found, and they did some studies on this, is people like Adidas and Electronic Arts were advertising on the site. And they got a decent amount of lift and brand recognition. Then they allowed people to put these badges on there, and they tracked the return on investment and the brand impact, and it was 40 times the ROI of the original investment in advertising. 40 times more effective in terms of driving brand awareness and actually moving the needle in people's intent to buy those products. So does advertising work on places like MySpace and Facebook? Not the traditional advertising. Advertising through the mouths of the people who absolutely believe and love these products works amazingly well, 40 times better than traditional advertising. So if you're trying to sell products, what's the best way to get people to do it? Generate word of mouth. And these new social technologies can exponentially drive some of those things that happen. I want to go on and talk about supporting. And the idea is that people can support each other. And what amazes me is that people do this out of the goodness of their hearts. So here's an example. And also, it's all about companies enabling that support to happen. So one example is Oracle. They just recently launched a new site called Oracle Mix. And what they have is a lot of different things. And I circled up some of the things that they feature. They have a social network with people. They have groups and forums. They have something where you can generate new ideas, questions and answers, where people can answer things themselves together. So the idea is that if you're an Oracle customer, you can go and find each other here and actually start solving problems together. You're no longer dependent on Oracle to solve all those problems. And guess what? Oracle is really happy because they just lowered their support costs potentially. The other thing, though, you can see is that you can start also embracing people with these ideas. So the idea is that you have all this whole ecosystem of people collaborating together, and you come up with the new ideas. So one of the ways that people are doing this is through idea hubs. What Salesforce.com started last fall was the opportunity for customers to submit an idea. And it doesn't go into a black box or into some product development place. It actually goes onto their site called Idea Exchange. And you can see here, there's this idea here, display the account name on a contact lookup search result, and 680 other people have clicked on that and promoted it. So it's sort of a voting idea. People can go and actually comment on these things. And then what's interesting is there's a whole process. So Salesforce is actually laid out. You go and suggest an idea, people promote it, we actually review it, and we tell you what we've done with it. So one of the most controversial things that had to come up was when you're a Salesforce.com customer, when you sign in, this banner drops down. It's called a SAW banner. And the internal marketing people love this because it was captive attention of that user. And users hated it because they couldn't get to the stuff they needed to get done because the SAW banner was in the way. So the Salesforce.com product managers for years have wanted to get rid of this thing, but could never convince the people in marketing to go and do this. But when they launched this site, one of the first things that were suggested is get rid of the SAW banner. Be gone, SAW banner. Be gone is what they said. Lots of comments came in and said, absolutely, we hate it. 6,680 votes in 2 weeks of customers saying, we hate this thing, get rid of it. The product manager said, hallelujah, finally, we have the proof that we really need to get rid of this thing. It took them quite a while because they still had to build up the capital to really prove out the fact that this was a legitimate groundswell of support that they had from their customers. But as of 2 months ago, those banners were gone. But what would have been an intractable internal debate became quite clear because of these ideas that were being generated by their customers. So what they used to do is they used to have maybe 3 releases a year. But now with the customers chiming in, they're planning on having 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 releases a year because they can iterate so much faster with customers on hand. They can go and actually ask the community, would you like A or B? We have to make a choice. And the community would say, B, we like B a lot better, please do that. And they can immediately implement that. So what I'm going to do now is go on and talk about a short section here about who owns this whole process. Should it be customer service? Should it be marketing? Should it be IT? Should it be the CEO? Who owns this process? And I would say it really depends on what your objective is going to be. So, but more than that, I think who is the person who's going to own and drive this? Because in many ways, this is not about departments. It is not about a technology. It is about change management. So I jokingly say to people, if you're going to go and embark on deploying these things, the first course you should take is a course in change management, because it is about cultural change and a transformation of your organization. So here's some ideas. I think the most important thing is to start with the person who's going to lead this to be the most customer-focused person within the organization. Because in the end, if that person is not focused on that relationship, but is instead enamored with the technologies, the strategy is going to fail. So how do you identify this person? They probably use the word customer in every other sentence. And you know who these people are. They're the ones who are sitting there and saying, you know, we can't do this thing because it's going to hurt the customers. Or they're aching, you know, they're belly aching in the back of the room saying, but that's not the right thing to do. The customers are going to leave us if we do this. That's the person who really, truly understands and puts themselves in the feet of those customers and walks in those shoes every single day. But that's what you need. We need a person who's going to be an advocate for those people, to be their voice. Because it's so, so easy to slip back, to go back into the marketing frame of our mind, or in customer support frame of mind, that we just want to, you know, do what we have to do and get going with the things that we want to do, versus what our customers need to do. So that person can exist in many, many areas within the organization. The other thing is, I think it's important to put somebody important in charge. Oftentimes, I look at the organizations that people have and they go, oh yeah, we have a community effort. Joe over there is going to be running it. Joe has actually some bandwidth to do this. You got to ask, why does Joe have bandwidth? Probably because they don't want Joe to do anything else that's important. So where does community end up? Where do your Web 2.0 activities end up? It end up at the bottom of the totem pole. And you know, it's just kind of hard and messy. You know, my customers are kind of nasty sometimes when they're complaining, so I don't want to hear about it. Joe's going to go take care of it. Poor Joe. Nobody wants to be Joe. And Joe is actually having no resources. So I think if you really believe that these things are going to be important, then you want to put somebody important in charge. The other thing is you want an executive sponsor. Again, this goes back to who's going to be in charge, because this is going to be a hard thing. This is not something that's going to rest only in marketing or customer support. It's going to go across the organization. You can start seeing with the objectives that I put out there, this is something that transforms the whole organization. So you need somebody who can go and find somebody in IT to get you that server, to go build that single sign-on that you need. You need somebody in customer support to actually handle all these incoming calls that's going to be generated from your activities. You need somebody in marketing who understands how to position and everything and how to talk to these customers. And then lastly, you have to make the social strategy the responsibility of every single employee. You may start small, and I do recommend that. But the long-term goal is that who talks to customers every day? Who actually thinks about the customers? Well, it's everybody in the company. Then everybody should be vested in the social strategy. Everyone out there is potentially the most persuasive person to talk about the company. I look at places like Intel or Microsoft or Sun Microsystems, where they encourage every single employee to have a blog. And why do they do that? Because they know that the people who can talk most persuasively about the company, what they're doing, are the employees. So they don't restrict it. They have some policies and guidelines on what they can and can't do in blogs, but in many ways, the policy ends up to being just 2 words. It's be smart. We hired you because you're smart. We hired you because you know what you can do and not do. We're not going to stand in the way. You go and do what's right and be smart about it. So I want to go on and talk about the last part and give you a case study of how companies are transforming this way. So let's talk about Dell. Dell has been a very interesting company that I've been watching very closely for years. And they've had for 20 years now community forums. They used to be bulletin boards on the well, CompuServe, all sorts of different places, and they finally moved to the web. And it's very, very successful. I want to point out one person here. There's this guy here named Predator. It's a little bit hard to see, but he has he's done a lot on Dell.com for the forums. In fact, he spends more than 40 hours a week answering questions about optical drives and DVD drives on the forums and just helping people out. So here's a blow-up of what his icon looks like. That's Predator. And what he has done, he's done more than 21,000 posts since 1999 when he started doing this. And his total minutes online are 473,000 minutes. That's equivalent to 4 years of time that he spent on this. So again, he spends more time on this than his regular work week. And you have to ask the question, why does he do this? He's not paid. And we asked him. We asked him and said, why do you do this? And this is what he said. He said, I actually enjoy helping people. That's what got me hooked. When you help people and they say, thank you. They say, thank you. Now, we all help each other, and we have different levels of how much we feel comfortable helping each other. But the world is filled with predators, people like him, where they say, you know, I get something out of this. I get psychic income from being able to help people, and I get paid from that. And what's amazing to me as I continue researching this space is that people are so generous in helping complete strangers with no expectation of any benefit from themselves other than a simple thank you. So Dell's community forum has been great. If you think about how much help he's done, again, he's done almost 22,000 posts. Assume that each of those things are potentially a $10 support cost that has been saved for Dell having to support that. How much money has he actually saved Dell? I mean, it's millions of dollars. And he does it all for free. Now, so this is the idea of what Dell has built. And they were doing pretty well, but they started doing some things that were slipping back in 2004, 2005. And then this happened. Dell Hell begins. This is Jeff Jarvis. He writes a very popular blog called Buzz Machine. And he wrote on June 21st, 2005, and excuse me for the language, but I quoted him exactly what he said. Just got a new Dell laptop, paid a fortune for a 4-year in-home service. The machine is a lemon. He goes on and talks about how Dell promised to show up and fix the laptop, and they didn't. And he was furious about this, and he's writing on his blog. And he goes on for months talking about and documenting in exquisite detail how Dell just keeps messing up over and over and over again. And he's doing this in the blogosphere when everyone's tracking this. And they actually gave it a name, Dell Hell. So what happens? Well, Dell's sitting there going, there's a lot of bloggers really angry with us. You better do something about this. Now this is, note the date, June of 2005. So what they did was they actually began monitoring some blogs. It took them a while. February 2006 to finally do this, but they started doing it. And what they did is they said, we decided to listen first. They went out there and started monitoring who was talking about Dell and who particularly had problems with Dell. And they didn't just listen to them and say, we're really sorry. They created a special group in their customer service department that was trained, that had customer service and technical support capabilities. So they could talk to these bloggers and take care of everything from beginning to end. No passing off or escalating to somebody else. They took their elite team of people and created a blog resolution team to do this. And they found each blogger step by step and addressed what their needs were. And they started to make some inroads in this space. And what was interesting about what they did is when they started this whole thing, the negative sentiment of all the blogs that were out there was about 25% positive, 75% negative. And they started making some inroads very slowly in that area. But then as they were doing this, again, this is February 2006, something happened. Well, Dell was on fire, literally. These are Dell laptops catching on fire in Osaka, Japan. And this is in June 21st, 2006. So I think you all heard about this situation. Their laptops, everyone was banning them. I was flying on Korean Air shortly after this, and they told me that I had to tack my laptop away because they were afraid it was going to catch on fire. So I had to check it into luggage. So this was a huge blow to them. They were starting to make inroads and positiveness and out there. And then shortly after this, they launched a blog in July. And the first initial things that they did were like, oh, let's talk about our servers. Or let's talk about this great new camera that we have coming out, or this new printer. And people were screaming at them, what about the flaming laptops? And they went, oh, we should probably talk about those things. So it took them about a week, and this is the post that went up there. Again, this was on July 13th, 2006, and it says simply, flaming notebook. It says, beyond what you've seen in the blogosphere, there was no update on the now infamous flaming notebook from Osaka. We replaced the customer service, they're giving them an update to say, this is what's going on. And what was amazing, they were really nervous about this. Okay, we're owning up to it. We have a flaming notebook problem. And the comments that came back from this were, thank you. Thank you for being here and having this conversation with us. And it was interesting because Lana Machaka, who was a person running this whole program, whom he was in the first couple of days, he didn't sleep very much the first couple of days of launching this blog. He was sitting there in the depths of despair, trying to get the internal people to put this post up because he felt so strongly it needed to be done. And at 1 o'clock in the morning, this email comes through, and it's from Michael Dell. And Michael Dell says, hang in there. You're doing the right thing. We will get there. And he pushed through to make sure that this notice got up there. That's a commitment from the company. And this is a company that took a lot of time to finally get up the gumption to go and do something about the blogosphere. Now in the course of just a few days, really turning things around and really engaging in that conversation. This is a pivotal moment in terms of transforming this organization and culture to be much more two-way in conversation and addressing people in a different way. You had a question?
How did the timing of this coincide to the change in top management at Dell? They had to throw somebody out of the top position and get Michael Dell back.
Yeah, Michael Dell came back in February 2007. So this is before then, but he was being very active in the social aspects of things, as chairman. And he felt very strongly that this is Dell's culture. We've always been a company and a customer-driven company, especially because the community forums are so strong. He said, this is in our DNA. We've just lost sight of that. We need to bring it back.
The organization started to rot.
It was rotting, yeah. And so it's been interesting. It's been interesting, but this really galvanized people. And what Lionel did that was so fascinating is he actually started going around and getting a lot of people involved. And I'll talk about it in just a second. What Michael Dell did when he came back in February 2006, one of the first things he said is we need to have greater input from customers, because it's been so wonderful to have them comment on the blog, but that's us leading the conversation. We now lead them to lead the conversation. So they created IdeaStorm, which is built on that technology you saw from Salesforce earlier. And what it does is it allows people to go and submit their ideas and then vote on it, and they actually start implementing it. The very first thing that went up there was for them to offer a Linux PC to consumers. They said, okay, which version of Linux do you want? And they had a poll up there, and the community came back and said, we want Ubuntu. Okay, now do you want support? What kind of support do you want from Dell? They go, we don't need support, we're Linux. And so it was interesting. They went and did this. Usually it takes between 12 and 18 months for a consumer electronics company like Dell to create a product. They create the Linux PC for consumers that you can buy direct from Dell in 2 months. And what's amazing is look at how many people voted for this. Almost 33,000 people. Hey, marketing is done. Just go tell these people it's available. Ka-ching, start taking those orders. So highly efficient way to build an organization. Now what was interesting, just a couple things about this, Dell really started transforming itself. It went from Dell Hell, the depths of despair in 2005, to fully embracing their customers 2 years later. This is what they did. First of all, I think Michael Dell's role was absolutely essential in this. High-level executive who understood this, cleared the paths to get this done. The other thing is, Lado Menchaca, the manager, was actually spreading this idea of groundswell thinking throughout the organization. It was very interesting when he did this. He was writing the blog a lot, and then people was like, oh, you know, could I write a blog post? So he'd go and find somebody who would write a blog post. But after they started writing the blog post, he'd ping them and say, hey, you're getting lots of comments. You have to respond back to them. Oh, and by the way, here's some tracking software for other blogs that are talking about your products. You should probably write on those too. And by the way, here's some discussion groups. And so he was bringing them in very slowly and sort of sneakily. They didn't know they were signing up for all this level of groundswell thinking and activities. But because they were now vested in this, that their product was out there and they were talking about it, that they started that conversation, they had to continue it. And he did this manager, by paying for a reluctant manager throughout the organization. The other thing they did is that they weren't afraid to move fast and make mistakes. When they launched a blog, they did that in 2.5 weeks. It didn't work out very well in the beginning, but they then went back and said, okay, we're going to learn from this and be much better at it. They launched IdeaStorm again in about 3 weeks. They didn't linger on this for months and draw up really elaborate plans, because they knew whatever they created was going to have to be thrown out in some ways, and they weren't going to get any better until they actually put it out there and road tested it. So a couple takeaways from Dell. It took a crisis or two to really get them going on this. And it was really hard for them to do this in the beginning. They mastered one thing at a time, and I think this is so essential. They started with listening, and then they went to talking, and then they went to embracing. In many ways, I see companies trying to do too many things with those social strategies. I encourage you to step back and choose one of those 5 objectives, only one to begin with, because you want your organization aligned on those things, and you want to be very clear to your customers what that relationship is going to entail. I also believe it's very difficult to do embracing unless you've done at least one of the other objectives very well first. The other thing is it took time. It took them 2 years. And in the internet speed and Web 2.0 speed, that seems like it's forever. But that's what you're signing up for. This is not so simple as putting a technology out there and making it work. It's about transforming an entire organization and your customer base about how that relationship is going to build. And as you know, any sort of good long-term relationships, healthy relationships, take time. There are no such things as those quick marriages that really last. The other thing, it took that executive to have that push and to have the cover. And I think this is absolutely important. It was important for them to be authentic. Dell realized very early on that they couldn't sneak out there. They couldn't do sort of this stealth move. They had to be absolutely direct and honest about all the mistakes that they were making, because that was the way that they were going to gain credibility in the space. So just to summarize, and then we'll take some questions. My theme today is to focus on the relationships that are created by these technologies, not the technologies themselves. The second thing is think about those objectives that you have and start with only one of them to really focus your efforts. And start small, but really think 3 years from now, what is that relationship going to look like? What's it going to feel like in terms of that relationship you want with your customers and with your employees too? And then finally, think through the consequences of what happens when that relationship with your customers changes. Consequences for that relationship, but also for your organization. Because I guarantee you, the way that you organize, the way you think, the way you staff, the way you give incentives, the way you hire, we're all going to change because of the way these relationships are changing. So this is my contact information if you have any more questions. And at this point, I'll take some questions here. Yeah, right here. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, thank you.
There is a news item today that seems very relevant. It said that there's a startup in California that is beginning to provide internet service providers technology to intercept all of a customer's links and analyze them, supposedly for the purpose of targeted advertising. But there's also, so I would be interested in if you heard about that and what you think the significance is for the business and the social networking and for the privacy concerns of the customer and for all of those behind all these links.
Yeah, you were talking about behavioral targeting that's out there in the profile building that was talked about in the paper. So it's the idea that you're collecting all this information to build a profile of somebody so that you can target ads against them.
This was the internet
Yes.
provider itself.
Right, the ISP's doing this. Right, my feeling is that right now, the idea that we have privacy in terms of what we do online, it doesn't exist. I mean, when we go out there, we are in many ways, when we sign all those things, of those statements, we say accept, we don't read, we're signing away our privacy. I think in many ways when you sign up for your ISP, you've also signed up, you've given away your privacy. If you read those things very quickly, they can track everything that you do. And so in many ways, I think the thing that it's not so much the tracking that bothers me, that's just an acceptance that I have. It's what people do with that information. So I've been one of the victims of Facebook Beacon over the past month, where my information when I was buying something on Overstock got transmitted to Facebook and I had no knowledge of it. And it wasn't so much that the information got transferred, it was the fact that I had no control over it. And that level of transparency is absolutely essential. And I've said, and oftentimes, that there's a very thin line between being helpful and transferring information, sending me relevant ads, and then the perception of that, and it's a very thin line stepping from that to Big Brother. And it's a line that I think people are constantly trying to figure out. So I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned about this.
Comprehensive non-privacy.
Yeah, and so people like Facebook are really taking a step back from that. My feeling is but if you ask people are very concerned about the privacy, but they're willing to give it up for free shipping. Yeah.
What do the company lawyers think about a lot of this?
They're freaked out. I mean, they're totally freaked out. They and investor relations. And so they feel like, am I going to have to file something to the SEC every time my CEO blogs something? The way I think about it, when you engage in business, you engage in risk every single time you have somebody talk to a customer. But yet there is acceptable business risk. And one of the biggest problems here is that a lot of the legal people and a lot of people in business and executives don't really understand, first of all, what is that risk? And second of all, what's the benefit? So I do a lot of work around the ROI of all of these technologies. And in reality, the ROI, the metrics, this is not new media, new metrics. It's new media, use old metrics, because that's what people understand. So I think the challenge is for people who are engaging in this area to bring it back to the metrics that executives and managers and legal people understand. When you engage, for example, if you want to go to blog, the legal people say, but they'll say things they're not supposed to. Well, let's mitigate that risk. Give them training so they know what they can say and what they can't say. The trick is to draw that box for social media engagement. And every company has a different tolerance level of how big that box is. Microsoft, be smart is their policy. Forrester, we're working on ours and it's a mess because we are in disagreement about how big that box is. And it's a very interesting exercise because that policy guidelines oftentimes defines how you see yourself and your relationship with your employees and your customers, how open you want to be, and also how much you trust your employees to do the right thing. Okay. So another question? Yeah, right here.
I want to applaud you for this presentation because it's reinforcing everything I'm thinking about in terms of the startup I'm working on right now. The question I have is this. 25 years ago, I employed these ideas, but I was across a desk from somebody. I was across the lunch table from somebody. I was listening. I was talking. My customers developed my product, okay? If you start them off right, and then you stop and listen, they'll do that for you. The real question I have right now is that a line of text on a computer screen is nowhere near the communication power of bending an elbow together. How do I take the digital media and get them to feel more intense in dialogue so that I can get that kind of real feedback from people?
Yeah. It's a good question, because your fundamental question is, in other words, how do I take something that's virtual and make it much more real? You can't really close, how often do you actually close a deal, so to speak, through this medium? And how comfortable will people feel? And I kind of think of it this way. If you think about the way communications happen, those face-to-face, those phone calls, it gets more disconnected, emails, social networking sites, text message, whatever it is. In the end, it is still communication, and they all have different roles, is what I believe. So you're absolutely right. Those objectives are classic objectives. They're not new. What I'm trying to say is the use of these technologies without those objectives really just falls flat. Okay, but listening, can I listen better because of these tools? It's not that I don't use the old tools anymore. I'm just listening in a very different way, primarily because my customers are using these tools too. And if I'm not there communicating and listening to them in the way that they're using these things, I'm losing out. Guess who is going to be doing that? My competitor over here, or another startup. I can't afford not to listen in this new way. And it was interesting, when I was talking to Dell people, and I go, when you started doing this, their whole idea was, we have customers in pain out there, and we have refused to listen to them. We can't do you can't do that anymore. And I often see companies out there have forums, and they don't participate. Why don't they participate? Because they think, well, this is my customer's forum. I can't go in there and disrupt it. I'm like, but your customers are talking about their problems. And you're standing back there, well, I can't help them with that problem? That's shameful. You should be absolutely right there next to them in those forums saying, tell me more about that problem. Help me help you fix it. Help me develop products that won't break down like this in the future. Versus standing back and having this glass wall because you think it's improper for you to get involved with your customers. It's amazing how many companies would say, oh, we have forums, but we don't actively participate in them. And I go, why? But I challenge you, there are thousands of forums out there from companies that run. Almost none of them have any sort of official company participation in them. Almost none of them do. Yeah, right here.
I think measuring returns for social networking it's pretty challenging. What are some of the techniques that you felt companies have used in order basically for them to cross the wall and make the investment business?
First of all, let's just talk about blogging. I've written a whole report around the ROI blogging. One of the key benefits is brand visibility and influence. And so I go back to the company, actually a sort of a tongue-in-joke cheek. They go, a CEO of a company goes, how do I measure the ROI of blogging? And I go, oh, you measure it the same way you measure PR. And they usually have absolutely no idea what the ROI of PR is. But that raises a question, why are you holding this to that measure? But I go back to saying, you measure in the same way you measure any other brand building activity. So if branding is a key objective of yours for having the blog, measure it in the same way you do everything else, pre and post. Before they read the blog, after they read the blog. You ask your customers at the end of a sales cycle, what were the tools that you used to help you make your decision? Include blogs in there with television and events and salespeople and in-store visits. And say, do blogs even register? If they register, at what point in the decision-making process? It's traditional marketing closing the loop. And again, the biggest problem is most companies don't do this. So if they don't do it, they can't even, if they're traditional marketing, they have no chance of doing it with their blogs. There was another question here, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to this idea of private data versus corporate data, but not not from the privacy issue, but something else, which is that storage is just going through the roof, you know, in terms of real, what it takes to watch it, to index it, to back it up, et cetera, et cetera. And I just see in 5 years from now, I mean, it's going to be like huge, because if you're keeping copies of this guide, you know, this person here, and it goes on and on and on, how long do these blogs have to, or the online community stuff, how long does that have to be kept on, and what kind of, you know, we don't have a legal framework for some of these things that don't belong to social, but belong to me, but they're hosted up there. You know, how long does Facebook have to keep it up there if I'm inactive?
Well, Facebook actually, again, it's an interesting topic because if you go and look at search engines, for example, they take your personal data, they don't store it anymore after about 18 months of them tracking your information because it's not relevant anymore from a marketing perspective or search behavior perspective. Facebook, they keep a commitment to say, yeah, we'll keep it all, you know, until you deactivate. You know, in the end, storage is pretty cheap. It doesn't seem like, how could they store terabytes and all those types of information, but it actually is, in the scheme of things, pretty inexpensive. So they're committed to storing all of this information out there, absolutely.
So Facebook said we'll keep it.
We'll keep it.
Indefinitely.
At some point, they will probably message you because you haven't used your account in a year and say, hey, if you're still active in this, let us know. If not, they may take it off. They haven't had to do that yet. They're still a pretty young company.
In the scheme of things, it's pretty.
Yeah. Go ahead.
In your exploration of like the different communities and support groups, have you found a difference between ones that allow anonymous posting versus ones that either have verified, there was some privacy issue talk there, but you know, knowing that this customer is actually a valid customer or is a face that, you know.
Yeah, and so the question is there a difference between anonymous communities and communities that have some sort of registration versus communities that have known identities? There definitely is. There's a huge difference. People who have known identities tend to behave a lot better. You know, they're a lot more polite to each other. But the circumstances where that happens, though, is when it's important to have known identities. So, and it's very few and seldom, and there is a tremendous level of trust that needs to be built within an organization to have known identities. So, for example, at Forrester, we have communities of clients. And it's really important for people to know that Sarah over here is from this particular company, because I may be a competitor and I don't necessarily want to spill everything on the beans. I want to know who are the people I'm talking to, so I'm collaborating with them. There has to be a high level of trust. But on my blog, there's no requirement that they say use a real name. I get Fred Flintstones all the time. And then there are places where there's no sense of real identity. And oftentimes it turns into a flame war. And so I think it's really important. And what's actually very interesting is when I see these forums where a company is being bashed or a blog post or something, and then the company shows up. And people are like, oh, so glad with you to be here. You know, all about behavior. And I'm like, they were always there, always listening. So in many ways, when companies say, I'm having a problem with this blogger, and I go, call them up. And 9 times out of 10, the blogger is like, oh, you're here. I just wanted some attention. They got that attention. The blog resolution team, they become happy, hunky-dory. They just needed that attention and that knowledge that, and actually they get a tremendous amount of psychic income from that, again, of being important enough that somebody from Dell called them. Yeah, in the back here.
Is Predator a known registered entity?
We know his real name and everything, but that's his by name. He doesn't necessarily tell people who he is. His first name is Jeff. He says his name is Jeff. He's quite open about it.
But he's not a registered customer, for instance, of like the question that was just asked.
No, he's not. Well, interesting because it's a difference between identity and reputation. He has a huge reputation. He has a platinum level. Obviously, he's very, very well respected. But he doesn't use his real identity. And it's an interesting thing. If you go to Amazon, you can see this at play. They started something called real names. So you can verify that you actually are this person when you're writing reviews. Those reviews actually get a lot more status because then you know the context of who that person is versus you not verifying your identity. Yeah, in the back.
But did Dell actually improve their customer service, or did they improve their ability to talk to the squeaky wheels?
They improved the customer service, definitely. I didn't tell you what the results were. It's still not great, I have to say, okay? Okay, we got some people evidencing here. And again, me as an owner of one of those products, I agree with you completely. But the sentiment is interesting. Their negative sentiment was negative, 75% negative, 25% positive back in the summer of 2005. This past summer, 2 years later, it's about 55% positive, 45% negative. That's a huge change. And a lot of it was through these social activities. Okay, one last question. Yeah, right here.
Yeah, so you started out by saying focus on relationships, not technology. But it seems like a lot of the problems are about the technology of relationships. Is there anybody focusing on the technology of relationships? For example, a lot of the stuff that you've mentioned, it's really about squeaky wheels, people that have an intense pain, and they're really pissed, or they're really happy and they want to make a difference and they want to register some signal to the makers of this product service so that they not only can help them, but they feel like, well, geez, if they help me, maybe they can help everybody else. You help the squeaky wheels and your service goes up for everybody because now you're smarter, you're a better organization. So I guess my question is there anybody focusing on the technology of relationships, actually registering emotions, the intensity of emotions, gathering that kind of data up, finding out what the best way to address an emotion is?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing because when you think about the brand monitoring, they measure sentiment, positive or negative, and they also measure influence. So if you're going to have a squeaky wheel, you may as well tackle the one that has the biggest influence first. But the thing that they haven't done is they haven't registered sort of like pain thresholds or love thresholds. How can you tell really whether somebody's out there and really enjoying it or not? But I haven't seen that information yet.
Use normalized emotions.
Yeah.
I tell you I am angry. You say, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least angry, 10 being the most angry, how angry are you about this thing right now?
Yeah.
You just have an emotion.
No, that's a good point. And what's interesting is when it comes to sentiment, it's really hard to pick out sarcasm. Oh, that was a really good move. It's really hard to figure that out from a machine learning.
Thank you. We want to thank Charlene again. I don't know how much time she has to stay.
Thank you. I think that's good.
She's probably going to stay for just a few more minutes if you want to ask some questions, but you also have her contact information, and this talk will be online.